Alright, Dark Horse Chapter 13. T.G. Churchill placed her hands on her hips and gazed uncomprehendingly at the scene. Sweat dampened her forehead and grime streaked her bare arms. A yellow pencil thrust behind her ear protruded through the long hair, now gathered into a workmanlike bun. "I can't believe it," she said to Joe Cusick. 14, 15, 16, 16 more. She leaned against the congressman. "Hold me, Joe. I don't know whether to laugh or faint." But T.G. did neither. Instead, she and Joe hugged each other, and then she stepped forward and directed the two uniformed mailmen who had trundled a cart laden with 16 fat canvas stacks into Quinn headquarters on the 5th floor of 1140 Connecticut Avenue in Washington. It was the third delivery this Saturday, thanks to a special deal worked out by Cusick with the Capitol's postmaster. "Just pile them behind this desk," T.G. told the postman. As they heaved the swollen bags off the hand truck, T.G. drank in the scene around her. It was late Saturday afternoon, 10 days before the election, and Quinn headquarters was as busy as a Mexican market. Girls shouted, phones rang, shirt-sleeved young men cruised the narrow aisles, file drawers banged, typewriters chattered. In one corner of the large room, two men toiled over a bulky mimeograph machine. Nearby, a circle of staffers, some sitting on boxes and upturned wastebaskets, huddled in conference. Others in cubicles along the wall consulted books, papers, and one another. Tobacco smoke fogged the room, and discarded paper cups overflowed trash baskets. The din pulsed in wavelets. More than 200 people labored in a space designed for 60 working bodies. Every political campaign, including those starred for defeat, hits a day when the electricity of hope suddenly charges a headquarters and boosts the voltage of the workers. The day is always one of heightened stress and spirits, even for jaded veterans. In novices, the day generates heady thrills. This was T.G.'s first campaign, and only occasionally in her 24 years had she experienced a natural high of such altitude. Joe Cusick had returned to Washington Thursday to straighten out an increasingly confused staff at the 1140 Connecticut Nerve Center. Joe called Eddie and asked for help. Someone close to Eddie had to manage the mail, he said. Letters with money were beginning to flow into headquarters in response to Eddie's Finn for Quinn appeal at Washington Courthouse, Ohio, Wednesday afternoon. Already, Joe suspected, volunteers were pilfering cash from envelopes. Eddie asked T.G. to take on the chore. At first, she protested, contending the transfer was punishment for talking to a reporter about marijuana, but Eddie insisted he was promising not exiling her. He was promoting, not exiling her. She pleaded lack of interest in money. Time she became practical, argued Eddie. In the end, she agreed and flew back to Washington Friday night. She began work early Saturday morning, now 8 hours later. T.G. was an expert on the receipt, if not the solicitation of small campaign contributions. She made swift calculations as she watched the mail handlers unlock the canvas sacks. 2 earlier deliveries had brought nearly 20 bags, each of which contained about 1,200 letters. The average envelope held $3.47 in currency, coins, checks, money orders, or stamps. Thus far, today's haul netted $83,280, and she estimated the new bag would yield an additional $60,000 or more. T.G. was beginning to love the sight and smell of money. A dozen young volunteers recruited from George Washington, Catholic, American, and Georgetown universities went to work on the new fiscal crop. T.G. supervised an orderly routine. 4 workers opened envelopes and dumped the contents into a large drop cloth. Others sorted this pile into a number of large wooden boxes, one for letters, another for currency, a third for coins, a fourth for checks, and a fifth for miscellaneous items of value. 3 more college volunteers who had just arrived hovered over the sorting. T.G. administered her short order security oath. "Do you promise not to steal anything? If so, raise your right hand and say, 'I do.' If not, split." The trio raised right hands and repeated the oath. "Okay, you go to work on the letters," she ordered. Put the say-nothings in one pile. If you find one that's interesting, like it, could be quoted in the press, put it in this box. Any from Eddie's friends or that you think he ought to answer when he has time, put them on the desk here. Free Cokes and coffee over there. Take your time, but work like hell. Joe Kuzik, who had been leaning against a file cabinet, walked toward her with his slow, awkward gait. The big check moved like a man trying to stride through a bin of ice cream. He threw an arm roughly around her shoulders. What do you guess for the day, TG? If this load goes like the last two, it ought to check out around 150,000 or something. Some haul, huh? And there ought to be more tomorrow. I got a deal for special Sunday service. How'd you fix that? Hell, honey, I went to bat for the postmaster when the postal clerks were after him on a job ruling thing. He owes me 150 grand in one day. Eddie'll like that. Whoa. It was a cry from a girl working over the drop cloth. She held up a check. Everyone stopped and looked. $3,000. T.G. took the check and studied it with Joe Kuzik. Made out in neat handwriting to the Quinn campaign and drawn on a Milwaukee bank, it was a personalized check in the name of Marcia D. Hudson. That's Senator Hudson's widow, I think, said Joe. There has to be a letter in it. Joe and T.G. joined several students in pawing through the heap of letters, bills, and coins on the drop cloth. Here it is, said T.G. She and Joe moved to one side to read the letter, green script on gray-bordered stationery. Dear Eddie, I hope you won't mind my using your nickname, but after following what you've been saying for the past week, I feel that we are political, if not personal, friends. It's no secret that I differed with my late husband over many social and economic issues in this country. I felt strongly that if something weren't done soon to close the terrible gap between rich and poor, we faced a revolution in America. I still believe that. Now your Fair Shake program comes along like a fresh wind. While I don't agree with everything you say, I'm for 90% of it, and I admire the bold, fearless way you present it. And this from a woman whose capital came from largely through the tax loopholes you talk about. I'm making this contribution without strings. The only favor I want from you is a promise that you'll keep on saying what you're saying regardless of who tries to stop you. It has desperately needed saying by a major candidate for many years. God bless and Godspeed. Sincerely yours, Marcia D. Hudson. Love that woman, said T.G., that's the first check we've had for more than $100. She tapped her teeth with the letter. Listen, Joe, the RBC camera crew will be here at 5 to shoot the counting. Why don't I call Mrs. Hudson and see if she'll let us use the letter? Good idea. Go to it. Joe Kuzik whistled a few bars from an old high school marching band song as he lumbered off to make his rounds. The congressman now headed a thriving, if frenetic, workshop designed to funnel facts, figures, ideas, and solutions to R. Dan Finelli on the campaign trail. There, Finelli put them into expoundable shape for the candidate, who promptly gave them a twist of his own that made headlines. A sample, thought Joe, was a task force proposal to establish a federal householders complaint agency in Washington, which would handle citizen protests against such everyday headaches as shoddy products, overpriced supermarket goods, faulty cars, dangerous toys, and high mortgage rates. As revamped by Eddie in an Illinois speech yesterday, this became a White House-endorsed picket line. When I'm president, Eddie had said in Vandalia, you send those complaints to the White House. If we think they're justified after checking, we'll send you some picket signs. For instance, President Quinn protests the First National's outrageous 9% charge on home loans. And if it's bad enough, folks, I'll come out and join your picket line myself. Or Eddie's bit yesterday at Effingham, Illinois, where he said every warden and prison guard in the country should be made to serve 2 months' time as an anonymous prisoner in another penitentiary before returning to duty in his own prison. That had come out of Kuzik's workshop as a closely reasoned proposal for encounter groups of prison officials and militant inmates, guided by psychologists and aimed at eliminating the worst tensions of prison life without sacrificing security. With Eddie, God bless him, one never knew. Right now, the circle of young lawyers over in the corner was hammering out a plan for preservation of the vanishing wild ocean shoreland. Cusick would phone the consensus to Finelli this evening in time for Eddie's speech tonight to a convention of conservationalists in Springfield, Missouri. And what would Eddie do with the ocean beaches? Joe had no idea. But whatever he did, Eddie would electrify his audience, shocking half of it, and steal the morning headlines from Penholster. All week long, volunteers had flowed into campaign headquarters, swamping the paid staff of some 20 pensioned persons inherited from Senator Hudson. Most of them were young, and many were lawyers from the big politically oriented Washington firms or senior law students from nearby universities. Some trained in the investigating task forces of Ralph Nader, who knew special pits and burrows in the caves of federal bureaucracy. After he arrived Thursday, Cusick made it a point to talk personally for a few minutes to each volunteer, and he sensed that his growing battalion of young attorneys and graduate students represented a youth trend away from Penholster. Eddie's free-swinging personal campaign style, unfettered by traditional doctrinaire chains of left, right, liberal, or conservative, attracted them because they believed that Eddie would listen to any idea, no matter how novel or unorthodox. Joe now headed for the cubicle where two women law students and a young professor of sociology at Howard University labored over a tough question they themselves had put to Cusick. What kind of change in the tax laws would halt the exodus of business and industry from big cities? Unless someone came up with an answer soon, they argued, unemployed blacks might touch off an armed rebellion that would make the riots of the 60s seem like playground exercises by comparison. But Joe was intercepted en route by a high school messenger boy. Two more volunteers were at the door. They wanted to go to work at once. Would he talk to them? Joe met the rookie politicians by the water cooler. They were both young, one bearded and one wearing jeans and a heavy wool shirt, the other smooth-shaven with a jacket and unmatched trousers. Joe knew the type by the slouch, the air, the mannerisms. He translated mentally. Ivy, wasp, family tree. "Are you Congressman Cusick?" From the beard, a confirming prep school Ivy League accent. "Yeah, looking for work?" "Yes, sir." For Beardless's intonation, add old money. "We can't pay anything, you know." "We know that. We want to volunteer." The beard was earnest, wanted to reform a few things, starting with mankind. "Give me a little background. You first." Joe nodded to Beardless. "We're both Yale Law seniors, and we're ready to work through the election. I'm from Chicago. My name's Brock Herron. Jacket tailored, lined with green silk." "Herron? What does your father do?" Beardless smiled, defiant confession. "Banking. Charles Herron. Same one you're thinking of." "And you still want to work here after what Eddie's been saying about your old man?" "I'm here, Congressman." Very cool, hinting that differences with father were old hat, stuff for yawns. Joe turned to the beard. "How about you?" "A son of another man, you know. My name's Cal Boyington. My father's the Hutchins Boyington with Penholster." Cold eyes. Nothing quite so satisfying as joining the opposition and thus giving the shaft to Boyington's household grandmaster of arrogance. "You guys got any special field?" "Corporate and tax law." Brock Herron understated, relishing the irony. "Came to the right store, huh? Well, we can put you to work at the ongoing wage. Free Coke and coffee." Cusick raked them with another appraising glance. But there's an if. If you come aboard, I'm not going to keep it a secret. You're good publicity copy, and Eddie can use all of that he can get." "No problem." Cal Boyington's game plan. Keep one step ahead of everybody at all times. We talked that over before we left New Haven. "Interviewers? That works." "Sure, but of course we're also here to do a job." Cal's eyes, gun slits in the fortress of hair, were ready to mow down the enemies of humanity and brotherhood. "Okay, you can go to work tomorrow, 8 sharp," said Joe. "But right now, we'll start cashing in on the publicity." The RBC camera crew was moving in like an army of occupation. Lights, backpacks, antenna, research girls, producer, commentator, shields, rods, and boxes clumped and wheeled into the room and set up camp in the area where TG directed the sorting and counting of contributions. A man in a lemon shirt and striped bell-bottoms trousers, his blond hair sprayed in place to the rearmost ringlets, sang out orders that relocated people, objects, and intentions, thus beginning the subtle process by which reality is elevated to the magic box. TG was permitted to read portions of the letter from Widow Hudson, but certain angles and trapped fragments of conversation managed to communicate an aura of doubt as to the letter's authenticity. When the crew completed its shots of the counting, Joe Cusick offered his newest recruits to the director in the lemon shirt. When Joe explained their bloodlines, the director demanded identification, studied them, and studied the offered cards and instructed a research girl to phone the Heron and Boyington residences. "Okay, we'll do a 2-minute spot," he said, "subject to the checkout." Lights focused, a cameraman aimed, and an interviewer, faultlessly suited and cravated, stepped forward with a handshake. Joe and TG listened closely, noted all the questions and answers, and agreed that the interview was a fair one. But later, in Joe's office, long after the workers left for the day, TG and Joe were far less satisfied when they watched the RBC's news on television. In the interview, cut to 1 minute, Brock and Cal came through as callow dissidents, less fired by Eddie Quinn's vision than by a desire to elude the clutches of parents and affluence. As for their shots of the counting, they had a vaguely counterfeit quality, hinting that perhaps the Quinn staff had swelled the loot by dumping some of its own money on the drop cloth. The news show concluded with 3-minute shots of both candidates in Missouri, Penholster in St. Louis dwelling on the foreign perils lurking for the next president on various unruly continents, and Eddie speaking to the conservationists in Springfield. Eddie's great shoulders filled the screen with formidable bulk. "He's got power, that fellow," said Joe, the admiring fellow politician. "Yeah," breathed TG, "kind of an animal." The camera caught Quinn's finale. "And so, if I ever become president," said Eddie, "I'm going to freeze all the undeveloped waterfront land in this nation for the people. We'll use the right of eminent domain, and we'll buy the property at fair prices, and we'll put that beautiful land in trust for all of us to enjoy." They could see Eddie thrusting forward at the lectern, strong, intent, yet with the jaunty smile of a man who relishes his work. Do you know that a rich man recently paid $240,000 for 1 acre of shorefront at Sea Island, Georgia? That's true. Think of it. He paid more for one small piece of ground than some people earn in a lifetime. In California, one man owns a whole headland jutting into the Pacific Ocean, acres and acres of it, just so he can enjoy the view all by himself. It's worth a couple of million. Believe it? It's true. From Palm Beach to Bar Harbor on the Atlantic, and from San Diego to Puget Sound on the Pacific, it's the rich who hold the finest land. And they even try to keep us off the beaches with fences and dogs and guards and searchlights. Well, my friends, that's going to change. The shorelands and the riverfronts and the lakefronts belong to all the people. We, too, have a right to see the beautiful sunrise off Palm Beach, hear the waves rolling into Santa Barbara, and see the fish jumping in those private lakes. And if you elect me, we'll reclaim most of the waterfronts in America for our children and our children's children. Eddie threw his right arm upward and outward in the gesture that had now become his campaign trademark. Joe switched off the set. "Eddie," he said to the collapsing image, "you're something else." He turned to TG. "You know how that started?" She shook her head. "My bright boys came up with an idea for Eddie's speech tonight. They proposed that the federal government set standards for future building on undeveloped shoreland, mostly to preserve wildlife in the natural state. They had a lot of for instances, so I phoned Finelli after the RBC filming. Now look what Eddie does with it. He balls it out. He balls out the wealthy and says that he's going to buy up hundreds of miles of shorefront, riverlands, lakeside, and seaside. I don't think that's so crazy. Neither do I. It's just that I never know what he'll do with an idea. He's a pistol." Joe rubbed his tired eyes. "I only wish he had a chance." "You don't think he does?" The flurry of the day had left TG exhausted, yet dreaming of an office in the White House. He's up in the polls, and all those volunteers and that money pouring in. No way. Joe reached for his coat, spread over a chair. He's got a long way to go in the polls and only 10 days left. Any campaign draws volunteers. As for the money, you got a little better than 40,000 contributions, am I right? That's damn good for one day, but just remember there are more than 200 million people in this country. TG looked glum as she slung her macrame bag over her shoulder. Perk up, kid, said Joe. We're in this to wise up the people, and Eddie's doing a great job of it. He'll change the climate, and someday, 8, 12 years from now, we'll elect somebody like Eddie Quinn, by God. But 8 years seemed like an eternity to TG. As they walked past the vacant desks, littered aisles, the hooded typewriters, the empty coat hangers, and the locked safe, she wondered how Joe could take it so philosophically. Maybe Bill and that family tribe that pursued Eddie in Indiana were right. She turned out the lights at the door. Maybe, she thought, the system corrupts or debilitates everybody. TG fumbled in her bag for her last joint. Part 2. Ted Witherspoon called Charlie Heron from his long, low home nestled on a waterfront of Highland Park, the exclusive Dallas enclave. It was 1 a.m. Charlie, I saw your boy on television. Ted still fumed over Kate's presence in the Quinn campaign entourage. Misery, if it did not love company, certainly welcomed news of those similarly afflicted. What gives with the kid? Same old story, said Heron. I spent $50,000 on his education from prep school to law school, give him a car, a boat, and a trust fund, so then he turns around and says, up yours. What can you do? I don't know, hell, I think the country's had it. The score now tied on family defections. Witherspoon shifted aim to the chief target. Charlie, we're getting closer on that sex film. Somebody paid $1,000 for a strip of the negative. Who? Not sure yet. Steve ought to have it by tomorrow. Listen, what about Steve's stuff on Mabel Quinn? She's ready to talk. Why don't we have Rich put something in the newspapers on her? I thought of that, but I'm not so sure. She'd come off as the typical spurned, embittered ex-wife. It might create sympathy for Quinn. But she told the investigator that she threw Eddie out of the house because he was screwing everything loose around town except keyholes. Yeah, but all that's years ago now, said Heron. Let's leave it up to Rich. He ought to be able to judge public reaction, if he can judge anything. Say, did you get a call from Seymour Wick, Penholster's finance chairman? Yeah, Charlie. I sent my Washington man over to Wick this afternoon with 25 bills, cash. In many circles, a bill means $100. On the playing fields of Witherspoon, Heron, and Cuthbert and their friends, a bill was $1,000. I'm taking 30 to Washington Monday, said Heron. It's a sad damn election when I'm reduced to giving money to a character out in left field like Penholster. What can we do? Anyway, it's a good investment, Charlie. The more of our kind of money he accepts, the more friendly Penholster will have to be after January 20th. I know, still. Cheer up. I'll call you tomorrow after the next batch from Kipke. If Kipke doesn't come up with something we can put our teeth into by tomorrow, I say let's end it. What the hell, Ted? Quinn's beating himself anyway. The man gets wilder by the day. People aren't buying him. Is that what they're saying around the Chicago Club? Is that a crack? Well, that's what they're saying here at the Petroleum Club, but you talk to the guy at the gas station and, well, you get a different story. Not me. I hear the same thing all over. Well, have a good sleep. But Ted Witherspoon slept poorly, and in one of his spells of ragged wakefulness he recalled that the first time his friends of the Chicago Club and the Dallas Petroleum Club agreed on a sure winner, the year was 1948. The sure winner was Thomas E. Dewey.